All right. So now our presentation for the evening, we're very excited to have Brittany Blades from Oregon Coast Aquarium. I've been working with sea otters for like over 16 plus years, I think. Somewhere around there, not to date you, sorry about that. You don't want me this loud, but we might want to hear her this loud. So I will get out of the way. Welcome, Brittany, and thank you much.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brittany Blades. I am the curator for mammals at Oregon Coast Aquarium, and I am also one of the newer members of the Alaka Alliance board. But I'm going to get started here with talking a little bit about how I got here and how I've taken my journey on the path to be able to care for wild animals. And in this slide, you're going to see a variety of animals. I got my start off with working not just with marine mammals, but also with large cats, polar bears, and fish and invertebrates as well. But I'm going to talk a little bit before I get to sea otters. I have to introduce some of our current pinniped friends that we have at the aquarium. So we have 4 harbor seals. Our youngest is Tassie at 15 years old, and the age range goes all the way up to 49. That's Skinny. She's actually the oldest known living harbor seal right now, and she is doing awesome, and I love seeing her every day. And then we have 2 California sea lions, Catalina and Rosa. And then, of course, our sea otters. We have 3 sea otters. We have Schuster, who is 13. Oswald is 11. And Earl, our youngest, is just 3 years old. He'll be turning 4 on May 8th. So stay tuned to follow the aquarium social media. You'll be getting to see him do what he's doing in that photo, chomping on his birthday cake ice cream. So, like I said earlier, I'm going to start off with the journey that I have of how I got here to care for sea otters. And then we'll move into sea otters in Oregon and why do we care about sea otters being in Oregon and what the future of sea otters are in Oregon. So I was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest. I was actually raised in a logging family in northeastern Washington and northern Idaho, but it actually is what started my conservation journey with my grandfather and my dad. They taught me the importance of old growth trees and the dangers of clear cutting and the importance of a healthy ecosystem. So although it seems a little bit strange to have somebody who is an environmentalist come from a logging family, that is where I got my start. And my very first trip to the Oregon coast was when I was 12 years old. Unfortunately, Keiko was already gone from the aquarium. I'm really sad about that. I didn't get to see Keiko. But I did fall in love with the ocean and the Oregon coast. And I remember going back home to Northeast Washington, and it was raining one day. I'm like, I wonder if this is what it's like for middle schoolers on the Oregon coast. And now I've lived here for 14 years and I love it. So I feel very lucky that I've been able to make it here. So my specific training is I went to school at OSU. I actually didn't know much about marine biology or especially even working at a zoo or aquarium. I had no idea that was my pathway. The only thing I did know is that I loved animals. And so I started off with a pre-vet pathway with getting my degree in biology. And then pretty quickly figured out that I loved the ocean. Marine biology was more of my specific passion. And then caring for animals, how does that interact with each other? And that is working and taking care of them at zoos and aquariums. I also got a German minor, which really hasn't been that helpful. But I did actually get interviewed by a travel journalist who's German, and I was able to test out my German speaking skills with them a little bit. So that was fun. But really, the bottom line for anyone who's watching, who's thinking about getting into the field of working with animals, It takes a lot of internships. Thankfully, nowadays, there are more options for paid internships, but back in my day, about 16 years ago, it was a lot of unpaid internships and a lot of volunteer work. So my first internship was at the Oregon Zoo. And actually 2 weeks before I got that internship, I asked one of my friends who was a zoology major what he was going to do with his degree. And I was like, are you going to be a zookeeper? He said, yeah. And I laughed at him. And then 2 weeks later, I got my internship at the Oregon Zoo as a zookeeper. And actually, then when I graduated, I got my first job at the Oregon Zoo as a zookeeper, and he was an intern. So it's kind of funny how that all works out, where you never really know what you're really interested in until you actually give it a try. And I fell in love with working with the marine mammals there and the tigers and leopards, polar bears. Oh my. So I started off with the Oregon Zoo, their marine life area, and then the next summer of school, I got an internship at the Denver Zoo. So it's pretty common for people in this field to travel all across the US, or even across the border of Canada. Our newest hire actually came from Canada. So a lot of the people who work with me at the aquarium, a lot of them have come from all across North America. And my last internship was at wildlife safari, definitely not with marine mammals, but with cheetahs and tigers. And I learned a lot from that internship. And that's what kind of got my foot in the door for getting me my first job at wildlife safari as a zookeeper, and then getting to Oregon Zoo as a temporary keeper. And while I was getting paid as a keeper at the Oregon Zoo in Portland, I actually started volunteering at the Oregon Coast Aquarium here in Newport, doing the same job I was being paid for, working for free, just to get more experience at another facility. And it paid off. My third day of volunteering, they had a job opening. I'm like, hey, I'm here, I'm ready to go. So that's just showing the dedication and initiative of not giving up, and you're never too qualified to really volunteer, especially if you want to help out MidCoast Watershed.
Yeah.
So why did I choose this career? I already kind of touched on a lot of these bullet points, but like I said, I've always been interested in animals and conservation. Growing up out in kind of the country along the forest area, I grew up having black bears coming up to my window, seeing cougars and a ton of different wildlife, and learning how to respect wildlife as well. And the reason why I decided to choose this career over being a veterinarian or just doing field research is it is really something special when you get to have hands on the animal and build a relationship with them. It's one of the best feelings in the world when you have an animal that is a wild animal. Maybe they're completely blind and they completely trust you. And building that trust is really, really cool. And actually, meeting the sea otters, Thelma and Eddie at the Oregon Zoo at my very first internship, they're the ones who really inspired me to go down this pathway of sea otters. I'll touch more on them in a bit. I also love being able to educate the public about conservation. So even doing talks like this, I really enjoy getting to spread this knowledge to everyone. And when we're at the aquarium on extremely crazy, rainy, windy days, I've been talking on microphone, and there's one person out there that is sitting there in the rain and wind with me, just listening to what I have to say about sea otters and how awesome I think they are. And to me, that's huge. Like, that's awesome that there's somebody who's actually taking the time to listen and learn. And then the other really great thing is just knowing that we get to help increase the quality of life for these animals that are in human care. So all of our marine mammals at the aquarium, the way we get them is by them being rehabilitated and then not able to be released back into the wild for various reasons. And so being able to give those animals a chance and then continuously trying to improve that quality of care. We're always, as some of my coworkers in the crowd, we're always changing protocols because we're always trying to find something better and make improvements all the time. And I definitely would not be here without all of the mentors who have led me through this. And so this is something also really important for anybody who is interested in getting into the field or just really any field whatsoever. Staying connected with your mentors and that way you can continue to learn from them, and then they help with networking. You never know what position like other people are going to be in. So you might even have a volunteer that you're working with, and they could end up being your boss later on. So it's also just a good reminder of just always being kind and courteous to everybody, no matter what position they have. But yeah, these are all my mentors, starting on the far left at Oregon Coast Aquarium. That was Hannah Black, who used to work here, and then Denver Zoo in the middle. And on the far right are all of the zookeepers at Oregon Zoo who mentored me, and that's at the Sea Otter Conservation Workshop in Seattle that happens every other year. And so it's really cool to be able to stay connected with them, and we now all learn from each other, which is really exciting. So going to Oregon Coast Aquarium's sea otters, we do have all male sea otters, and it's home for all non-releasable sea otters. So there's actually no sea otters that are being bred under human care. All sea otters that are zoos or aquariums are all rescued and deemed non-releasable, and then U.S. Fish and Wildlife contacts the facilities to see if we have space to give them a home. And we train all of our sea otter, or not, we train all of our sea otters to do this. We are working towards the possibility of training the sea otters at the aquarium to be transported to other zoos and aquariums. So if there is a pup that comes in that's really young, we have the skill set to be able to care for that pup and do the initial training. And then there's some other zoos that are now opening up new sea otter habitats. And once that sea otter pup is old enough and trained basic behaviors, then we can transport that pup over there. And then lots of research opportunities here at the aquarium with our proximity to Hatfield right next door. So having an all-male sea otter population, it gets pretty wild sometimes. There's a lot of testosterone flowing around, but housing all males does give us the opportunity to where we can take a male sea otter pup that strands very easily. And sometimes male pups can be a little bit more challenging to home, just because males and females, you have to have the right dynamic or habitat set up for it. It is more common now to house males and females together, but it does make it a little bit easier for the transition. You don't have to worry about birth control, or you don't have to neuter the sea otters for birth control reasons. We also have one of the largest, maybe we have the largest, I actually don't know with newer facilities coming up, but we do have one of the largest sea otter exhibits. And that helps a lot with managing all males, where they can each have their own specific area to hang out. We've had some male sea otters where they have invisible lines that they will not cross because that's their territory, and then there's another sea otter's territory, and it's pretty impressive how they have marked these areas. We did end up neutering some. We did have some sea otters who were not cohabitating as well with their social behavior, and so we did opt to try to neuter them, and it did end up helping with managing their social dynamics. But even then, the social hierarchy is always changing, especially right now. We have Earl, who's 3, so he is about to go through his terrible 4s, which I feel like that's when I see sea otters start to test boundaries and dynamics start to shift a little bit more. And this is just a quick diagram of what our sea otter habitat looks like. So all the blue areas is the water, and then we have 2 holding pools in the back where we can separate otters out. So with us having 3 sea otters right now, we can separate each otter individually if we needed to. Or the very top right pool, that one can actually be used as a quarantine pool that we use when we get a new sea otter in. I don't know if anyone's really interested in our marine mammal permits, but if you want to know, the MMPA went into place in 1972. So that just made it illegal to take marine mammals without a permit, and that's managed by the federal government. And then NOAA manages cetaceans, seals, and sea lions. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife is responsible for managing walruses, sturgeons, sea otters, and polar bears. And then all zoos and aquariums and rehabilitation facilities are regulated by USDA. So this is an example of how we get our sea otter pups after they have deemed non-releasable. So Monterey Bay Aquarium in this photo right here, the photo with the person with the welding mask and poncho. That is at Monterey Bay Aquarium, and they have a surrogate mother program for their sea otter pups. So sea otter pups are extremely dependent on their mothers. They have to learn how to do everything from diving, grooming themselves, foraging. They learn everything from their mothers. And so what we have realized over the years of trying to rehabilitate sea otter pups is that they do not do well unless they are raised by another sea otter once they are released. Otherwise, they end up interacting with humans too much. So that's why they try to disguise the human form completely, so that sea otters aren't making that connection with a human that's giving them food. But what happens is that they only have so many surrogate mother otters. And so when they don't have enough sea otters that can be surrogates to these stranded pups, that's when U.S. Fish and Wildlife calls this list of facilities that have space to receive a sea otter pup, and they'll contact us to see if we have a space. So that's what happened with Earl. He's the main photo there. That's me grooming him. He came to us when he was 10 weeks old, but we got the call on Memorial Day weekend 2021 that there was a stranded 3-week-old sea otter pup, and could we take him? As soon as I got into cell service from camping up the Alsea, Paris, of Oregon.
Yeah.
After we got home into service, I immediately responded, yes, we will take this sea otter pup. And within a few more weeks, we had him here at the aquarium. And he's the youngest sea otter pup we've had recently. And so he still needed to be groomed by us and needed a little bit of extra care and being fed a lot more frequently. When we first got here, we were feeding him every 2 hours, 24/7. So it's pretty much taking care of a sea otter pup is like a baby, as one of our mammalogists has referred to before, that it prepared her for her firstborn, who's also here tonight. And then the quick little story about the photo on the top right is that this is the pool where we used to have this is our old sea otter quarantine pool. And when Schuster first got here, he was super nervous to come anywhere near me to get his food. And the way that we were able to build his trust was anytime that he would pop his head up on the very, very far end, 30 feet away from me, I would tell him good and toss a piece of food at the same time. And then he would take it, he'd swim underwater for about 5 minutes, because that's how long sea otters can hold their breath underwater. And then he'd pop back up and start eating, and then I would tell him good and toss him another piece. And so just with starting it like that, within a week, he was coming right up to me and taking his food pretty much with his paws from my hand. So it's really cool just to share that story about how important it is to use that positive reinforcement and leaving the choice up to the animals to be comfortable with you. And that's how we're able to build that strong, trusting relationship. And then another part of the job is for rehabilitation. So we have been able to rehabilitate or take a sea otter into rehabilitation before. And this was when there was a live sea otter at Yakima Head Outstanding Natural Area. And we were watching him for about a month or so. And this was so exciting for our entire mammal department. The second that we heard there's a sea otter there, I think we canceled our last feed, and we all just drove out to Yaquina Head, and we were watching him and observing him. And it was pretty awesome to be able to watch this guy. But he did end up we assume that it's the same sea otter. Was not tagged at all, so we can't 100% confirm, but 99% positive it was. But he was shark bitten and admitted into rehabilitation at the aquarium with authorization from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And he unfortunately only survived about 3 days. His shark bite wounds were pretty severe, but we learned a lot from him. And because of him, we were able to adapt some of the plans that we were making for our new rehabilitation center that we are currently building, and broke ground, and things are happening at the aquarium right now for our new rehab center. And so that's where our future plans for the aquarium is. We're building this wildlife center, and it will be a facility that's not open to the public, but it will be strictly just for rehabilitating any sea otters or fur seals or any human caused stranding for a marine mammal, and then marine birds and sea turtles. And this will just cause us to or help us have increased resources and staff to help with rehab efforts. And it can also put us into a position to help with future efforts to reintroduce sea otters back to Oregon waters. So if sea otters are reintroduced back to Oregon, then we will be ready for it. And even if they're not, then we still are able to use this space for a wide variety of animals. And this will also help us to be in a good position in case there's any sort of oil spills, not just along the Washington coast where the nearest sea otters are to Oregon, but even in California, depending on how severe the spills are. And this is a very busy, we can just skip over this, but that's what our plans look like for the rehab center. Another part of my job is traveling for professional development and conservation projects. So once a year, we send at least one mammologist down to California to get trained up by the Marine Mammal Center. And then just recently this year, we actually sent mammalogists to 3 different rehabilitation centers to help out with their high patient loads of seals and sea lion stranding. And then also I've done some conservation efforts down at the Elkhorn Slough with some research there, their sea otters. And monthly we send somebody up to the Washington coast to do surveys on the sea otters along the Washington coast. And so these surveys are led by Dr. Sean Larson at Seattle Aquarium, and research technician Amy Olson. And this is something that I had asked them if we could join them on, so that way we were able to be prepared for if there is a sea otter, like what happened with that sea otter that was hanging out in Yaquina Head Lighthouse. At that time, we didn't have the training to record foraging data, but now we have the training to be able to record actual foraging data of a sea otter that shows up in Oregon. So this is one of the key points, is that if you think you see a sea otter, please let us know, because we can then try to collect really important data to help us understand what type of impact sea otters could have on the Oregon coast if they are reintroduced. And this is kind of a test. Does anybody see the sea otters in this photo? No. You zoom a little bit closer, you can see some little dots there. And then zoom a little bit closer, now you can see that there are some sea otters, and there's actually even a few sea otters that are on the rocks. but this was actually a raft. I want to say that this was a raft of 50 to 100 sea otters. And so it just goes to show, like, going back to this, it's very easy to not see sea otters. So it's really important to just to always keep eyes out on the ocean. And this is just a fun little story about a sea otter eating an octopus. I have heard about sea otters eating octopus, but I had never seen it before. And this guy was just chowing down on that octopus for probably about an hour or so. And it was a giant Pacific octopus. So it was a big octopus. So that was just something that was really exciting to watch. And so now I have just recently joined the Alaka Alliance board of directors. And this is something that I've been wanting to be a part of the reintroduction effort since learning that sea otters were hunted to extinction in Oregon. And I remember my very first sea otter conservation workshop that I went to in 2015. I asked the panel, they're talking about sea otter reintroductions in California, and I was like, hey, what about Oregon? And it wasn't really something that was being discussed at that time. And so it's just really exciting to see the progress that has come with the Alaka Alliance coming into play again. Now I've been working on working groups with the Southern Sea Otter Regional Reintroduction Collaborative Group. That's a mouthful. But once again, for anybody who is wanting to get into the field, would not be in this position without networking, going to those conferences, and speaking up in front of a large crowd of the world's best sea otter experts, asking what may have been a silly question, but still helpful to keep moving forward and getting to where you want to go. So the next set of slides are not my slides. They are Chanel Hasten's slides. So thank you, Chanel, if you're watching. And I don't have the notes visible to me, so this might be a quicker section for some of them. But this is our Alaka Alliance here, and our latest board member meeting, where I got to be included in there on that top right photo. And they do a lot of public outreach. That's one of the biggest things that they're doing right now, which is what a lot of these photos all are. And the mission for Alaka Alliance is to restore a healthy population of sea otters to the Oregon coast, and in the process, help make Oregon's marine ecosystem more robust and resilient. This is my slide, actually, so I'm backtracking for a second. Thelma and Eddie, they were so key to my inspiration and shaping my career. It was because of them that I didn't know anything about sea otters when I first started that internship. I didn't know what they were. I didn't know how amazing adaptations they had. I didn't know they were hunted to extinction, and they're still extinct in Oregon. And that blew my mind. Learned about how they're a keystone species, and then also learned about how there have been successful sea otter reintroductions. So that's really what sparked my interest and passion into the recovery of sea otters altogether, but also specifically in Oregon. So sea otters being a keystone species, they're keystone species to not just the kelp forest, but also to estuaries. So really a variety of nearshore ecosystems, they act as keystone species too. And so this infographic is showing how sea otters are a keystone species in kelp, and what we have noticed with sea otters, and we've been able to learn a lot from them, because they were hunted to extinction in certain areas, and then they were successfully reintroduced. And so we got to see what happened to some of these ecosystems when sea otters were there was abundant kelp, and then sea otters were hunted to extinction. And then what we saw is that the sea urchins didn't have their top predator, the sea otter, and the sea urchins eat the base of the kelp. And so what ends up happening is you get overgrazed kelp and an abundance of sea urchins. Then what is really cool is that there were some successful reintroduction efforts of sea otters. And in some of those areas, they are able to identify that sea otters, when they came back, the sea urchin population decreased. With the decrease of sea urchins, you got the increase of kelp again, and then a variety of fish returned back, everything from kelp greenlings to rockfish to even juvenile salmon can depend on using a kelp forest as refuge from predators, and whales. The list can go on to how helpful kelp forests are, but it's really, that's how scientists were able to identify that sea otters are a keystone species and what even a keystone species is. And then in Oregon, just to kind of show what this is, new research that just came out from Oregon Kelp Alliance to show that Oregon has lost 2/3 of our kelp forest coverage from 2010 to 2022. And a lot of this is due to the sea star wasting syndrome. And the idea with sea otters, if sea otters were here, then that could help the kelp's resiliency. So having both sea stars and sea otters can act as keystone species in kelp forests. And so having both of those top predators are helpful in just the resiliency of that ecosystem. So even though sea stars can also act like that, but now there's been a sea star wasting syndrome, and the sea urchins have increased in population size again, and our kelp has decreased. And so this is what we talk about, where, hey, look at all this beautiful kelp. And then, oh no, it's just a barren desert under the ocean. They actually call them sea urchin barrens. And they're not healthy urchins. They're actually what I like to call zombie urchins. And I'm super happy that Chanel has used this slide. This is exactly what I would imagine. I've actually used this photo before myself for showing zombie urchins. So this is great. But you can tell the zombie urchin is the ones on the left compared to the uni that you see on the right is very healthy. So the urchins that are living in an urchin barren, they are not healthy. They're barely surviving. And compared to if you have healthy urchins in a healthy kelp forest, because they eat kelp, so they need that kelp too. So more talk about timeline of sea otters in Oregon. I really like Chanel's job with this. Once again, this is all Chanel's work here. I'm just interpreting it for her. But sea otters evolved from modern day Russia 2 million years ago. And then Native Americans arrived to the Pacific Northwest and coexisted with sea otters 10,000 years ago. So there's 10,000 years of humans and sea otters living together, coexisting. And then 115 years ago is when the maritime fur trade decimated 99% of the global sea otter population. And for Oregon, the last sea otter was hunted around 1910. And then 55 years ago, there actually was a translocation effort for sea otters to Oregon. And so moving on to the indigenous importance of sea otters, which Robert will be talking about soon, or after I'm done talking here. But you can see that in all of the coastline for Chinook, Tillamook, Alsea, all the way down the coast, you can see that they all had a word for the sea otters. That's also just showing that sea otters were here. And the really exciting thing about the anthropology of Oregon is that bones from both northern and southern sea otters subspecies were found in shell middens off the Oregon coast. So that means that we are the gap between the southern sea otters that are in California and the northern sea otters in Washington. And this is the largest gap for the sea otters range through their historical range. We have the largest gap in Oregon and Northern California. Here's some old photos. Chanel has all of this information about these photos, but these are photos of Robert Gray's Boston vessel going to Astoria, and all of these are these are drawings of Oregon areas. So these red spots on this map is the 1% of sea otters that survived. And the black area, that is the entire historical range of where sea otters used to be before the fur trade happened. So you can see how big of a gap. There's a very small group of about 50 sea otters that were found off the coast of California in the 1930s. And then there's that huge gap all the way up to Prince William Sound. And I'll go back to this real quick. That's until the 1970s when they did do successful translocations of sea otters to British Columbia and to Washington. Fortunately, when they translocated sea otters to Oregon, they did not stick around. That's something that a lot of the methods would change in those translocation efforts. Here we go, translocation effort. So one of the methods that would be changing if the otters were reintroduced to Oregon is that we would have a lot of monitoring of these animals, and that's part of what we're doing with sending people up to Washington and learning how to survey these otters, is helping us be prepared for if sea otters are reintroduced to Oregon. We already have a crew of people who know how to monitor sea otters. And so in this case, there wasn't any monitoring until 1972. There were actually 11 pups born over 6 years. So they were successful with breeding. And most of the animals were around Blanco Reef and Simpson Reef. But then there was a gradual decline over 10 years. And by 1981, they were all gone. And most likely, there could have been a high chance of the sea otters moving further north to Washington, and then there's sea otters that are translocated in Washington. So that could have caused the reason for the sea otters to not stay around in Oregon. So Alaska Alliance has published a scientific feasibility study, and the 5 key takeaways is that past reintroductions have been successful, just not here in Oregon yet. Reintroducing sea otters to Oregon is likely to succeed if done carefully. And that's what all of these working groups that we're all involved in, that it's been going on for years, and doing a lot of public outreach too, to get everybody's opinions and ideas. Estuaries might actually be key. So I didn't mention this when I was talking about the keystone species, but sea otters have actually been shown to be a keystone species in estuaries as well. And just recently, there was a study that came out in Elkhorn Slough that sea otters are actually making an effect on eating green crabs, Eurasian green crabs. They're an invasive species, and sea otters are actually eating them in a way that it's helping out other species that are native to the Elkhorn Slough. And there's a whole bunch of other ways that they help out the eelgrass by eating the crabs that eat mesograzers, that eat algae off of the eelgrass. In areas like the Elkhorn Slough, there can be a lot of runoff from the farms, a lot of fertilizer runoff. And so it used to be quite murky until more sea otters were inhabiting there with the successful release of sea otters rehabilitated from Monterey Bay Aquarium. And as the sea otter population increased, the water quality actually cleared up because there were fewer crabs, meaning the little grazers that eat the algae were increasing in populations, and there's less algae, and the eelgrass was able to thrive. And they help with decreasing erosion as well. There's a whole bunch. I could talk for hours about but the second thing, reducing sea otters will have many positive and negative effects. I just talked about a lot of the positives, but they will be having some negative effects with their impacts on the urchin fishery, for example, could be something. Social, economic, legal, and regulatory issues must be considered. So these were the big 5 key takeaways from that feasibility study. But the main takeaway, and this is the feasibility assessment done by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So they're 2 different feasibility study and a feasibility assessment, the study with Alaka Alliance and assessment with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And the main takeaway from their assessment is that sea otter reintroduction would result in significant conservation benefits to the species and the nearshore marine ecosystem. We also found that reintroduction would improve the conservation status of the southern sea otter in particular. So what are our next steps? Outreach and public engagement. Thank you for inviting me to be here tonight. That's what we're doing. And political support. So this is Bob Bailey, the board president, who's holding that sign saying oil and otters don't mix. And this is actually a QR code to, if you want to give any feedback to our local state representatives, you can respond to them there. Tribal engagement and more information and research. Exploring alternative strategies. So whether that is U.S. Fish and Wildlife being a key player with the reintroduction of sea otters, or maybe it is tribal and state, or state. So looking right now, the Alaka Alliance is looking at all options and not just focusing on one. And thank you. This is from Chanel. This is from Alaka Alliance. Thank you to the partners. She also includes Oregon Coast Aquarium. And this is back to one of my slides. Have you seen an otter on the Oregon coast? And if you see a sea otter, please take a photo or video and share it with us here at the Oregon Coast Aquarium or with Alaka Alliance. And this is, that's actually a saying that we say at the end of every single sea otter talk we give at the aquarium. And because of that, we've actually gotten a handful of positive sea otter IDs. And this one is actually from a sea otter sighting in Schofield Creek in Freedsport back in 2016. And the person who took the photo, he said that he had actually been watching this sea otter for months. So that's pretty cool. It's pretty fresh water there. I don't know that area that well, but I think it's pretty fresh water, maybe a little brackish, but pretty cool to see that. And any questions?
For our questions, can you just repeat it so the folks?
Yes.
Can hear it?
Yep.
Yeah, good, Mark. You know, if I recall correctly, wolves reintroduced themselves to the state of Oregon without getting permission from sapiens. And I'm just so surprised that sea otters just haven't, reintroduced that they're both the north and the south of us. I mean, I just sort of think that they would just be coming through here.
Yeah, so the question was that wolves reintroduced themselves to Oregon without asking Homo sapiens, and why have sea otters from Washington or California not naturally reintroduce themselves to Oregon? And the answer for that is right now we do actually see some male sea otters that will travel down south from the Washington coastline, but so far it's only been male sea otters, and so far the only raft of sea otters that we have spotted off the Washington coast is off Point Grenville, so still quite a big ways north. And I don't know the exact mileage, but it's still quite a ways north from Oregon. So that's still a trek for female sea otters to make down to Oregon, but that is something that it does seem like the population of sea otters in Washington is slowly moving a little bit more south. That's not a scientific answer, but that's just my own personal observation. And so it's not that they wouldn't ever, but it just would take a very, very long time. And the main thing is that I don't think we have the time to wait for that, for helping out our ecosystems.
Is it a male or female?
This is a male sea otter. This is, I believe this is Oswald. Megan would be able to tell me better than me. This is one of the sea otters at the aquarium. It's a male sea otter.
Can you tell natural from a view from the bank, whether they're male or female?
It depends. Sometimes you can, sometimes it can be really tricky. The easiest way to tell if it's a male or a female is if you can see the penile bulge at the base of their tail. Or if you can tell that, sorry, the question, how can you tell a male or female from the shoreline? So the females, if you can see that they're nursing, if they have enlarged teats, or if they're pregnant, that's a way you can identify a female. But it can be pretty difficult to tell unless you have a lot of experience with looking at both male and female sea otters. So like there are two sea otters that showed up at Cannon Beach. And that was something that a handful of us were able to identify as male sea otters by it was the penile bulge. Yeah.
Just curious about the food supply chain and how that all works with the interaction of the animals that are up in Washington and the ones down there in California, where you have the sea otters. What the difference is between those two? Yeah. Is there any difference in food supply chains?
Asking if there's any difference in the food supply chain in California and Washington versus Oregon without having sea otters. I mean, I don't know. I really don't know the exact answer for that one. I would assume that we would maybe have more zombie urchins in this area, but there still are. I mean, humans are also harvesting a lot too, so they're harvesting clams and crabs and everything too. So the food choices for sea otters are actually not really that different. Like even talking about Elkhorn Slough, the food that the sea otters are eating there are not too different from the food that they could find here in Aquina Bay, like the Eurasian green crabs. Yeah.
Do they normally live like in colonies, or do they live kind of individually, or?
The question is, do they typically live in colonies or individually? And they do typically live in large rafts, but then sometimes the males will end up kind of separating out. And a lot of times what we do end up seeing spin more and more frequently recently in Oregon is that we see two male sea otters together. So they do end up kind of pairing bonds with each other sometimes. And we see that even with our sea otters at the aquarium, where two sea otters create a relationship and are hanging out with each other all the time, and another two sea otters do. But up in Washington, I have seen rafts of sea otters that are like 750 sea otters in one huge raft. And there's safety in numbers. So that's one of the reasons that they will all stick together. But that's not always common. Then seeing them in the Elkhorn Slough, that was not the case. And they were much smaller rafts, and almost more seen from what I saw was that they were usually just a mom and a pup, or just more lone and independent, actually. So I think it just depends on the habitat of where they're at. If they're open ocean, probably larger reefs, like what I've seen before. Yeah.
Is there any hope for more otters without better kelp?
Is there any hope for more otters without better kelp? It's like what comes first, the kelp or the otter? There is hope. So in areas that sea otters have been reintroduced where there isn't much kelp, they were able to forage on some of those urchins and then cause that kelp to end up growing. And they feed on a variety of things. One of the things I actually see a lot of off the Washington coast is eating snails, which is not something I'd always thought of. Yeah, I know you eat snails. So yeah, they have quite a wide variety of food items that they'll eat. Yeah.
South of here, two of us have seen river in the near.
Mm-hmm.
Haven't heard any real information about the interactions going, oh, they're targeting a prey base or ocean, sea ice. And I wondered if you know, heard anything about that.
Yeah, so far there hasn't,
Question.
oh, sorry, thank you. The question is that it is common to see river otters foraging in tide pools. I've also witnessed this myself here off the Oregon coast. And is there any research done for the river otters and sea otters having conflict in the habitat and for what they're foraging for? And there hasn't been any signs of that being an issue. Typically river otters eat fish compared to sea otters don't eat fish, not saying that they don't cross over at all. And I have seen river otters that look like they were going for possibly urchins or mussels too. And I have seen them in it's actually with Clayton, maybe you remember what species they're going after, but yeah, there have been some videos of a sea otter and a river otter interacting in Alaska, but that might also be just where the population of sea otters is much higher in Alaska versus other areas of river otters. I don't know. Don't really have a straight answer for that, but I don't think that there would be any big impact on it. Speaking of that too, is a question that I get a lot is if sea otters are introduced to Oregon, would there be a huge spike of sea otters? Would they take over the way that they've taken over up in Alaska? And the answer is no. If you look at the map of the coastline of, I was hoping to have that in my slides. If you look at the coastline in Alaska, it's very jagged. There's lots of inlets and there's just a lot of surface area, so to speak, for sea otters to live in Alaska. A lot of nearshore ecosystem and little bays and estuaries compared to Oregon. When you look at both like Washington, Oregon, and California, sea otters, when they've been reintroduced to any of those areas, or even looking at how slow and long it's taken for the raft of 50 sea otters off the coast of California, they have grown very slowly compared to what you see in Alaska. And so that's definitely something important to recognize too. Yeah.
I guess I've heard anecdotally from fishermen, some misconceptions about otters in general. And so I was wondering if the local fishing community is a pushback with the things you're trying to accomplish, and if maybe advertising or trying to connect to maybe maybe help spread awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. So the question was about fishermen and their anecdotes of seeing sea otters. You say in Oregon or just in general?
like stories in the past they've heard
Yeah.
about others, and then maybe their relationship about seeing them today, you know, and how maybe have better information about how they should approach your.
Yeah, so the relationship between the fishermen and their perceptions of sea otters being here in Oregon and that connection, how Alaka Alliance is interacting with them is actually, they have a specific South Coast outreach coordinator, Kyle Motley, who his job is actually to connect with fishermen locally down in Coos Bay is where he's based out of, but I've also helped him. I have a lot of fishing friends and have also helped connect him just to try to spread awareness. Mostly, I guess, by word of mouth is probably the easiest and maybe even the best way to be able to build a connection with the fishing community and share the information about sea otters and what type of impact sea otters could have on the commercial fishing industries. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I
Okay.
just know that like sometimes a lot of these things are hard to find out about. Like I just heard about this from word of mouth and stuff, you know, like maybe if the town knew or like some of the fishing community knew about some of these events more, you know.
Yeah. Definitely. Comment was that he heard about this word of mouth and that it would be helpful to try to get more advertising or outreach to target specifically the fishing communities, which I totally agree. Yeah.
That's just one small thought is, I wonder, where is your sea otter here? He should be out on the floor here, so.
I know, I tried to sorry, the question was, where is my sea otter at? And
I don't know how they handle being gone, wherever they are. But as a kid, I grew up in a big town on the Mississippi River that had 765 people. We had 2 bars, 4 churches, 2 filling stations, 2 grocery stores, and every fall, I want to say probably November or so, there was a small public school, and we went to the 8th grade, and then you got the bus and you went into the town to go to high school. But we had a gentleman who would come to the school with his 2 river runners, and following down and climb up on the stage with him, and then get in it. He had a little tank set up. He had those river. I mean, I knew what a river otter was before I knew what a bull was.
Notes for your next presentation.
All right.
Point is, I think we gotta get closer. I applied in the planning office 9 years ago, and there seemed to be a quiet hush around the sea otter issue, and I could never quite figure it out, because I'm sure he can speak to that point, but what's been the progress? What has gone on? I don't see us in the same place we were 9 years ago. So
That's the perfect time.
Cool.
here. Thank you.
You, right?
Thank you, Robert.
I've got till what, 10:30, 11?
Yeah, we're here all night.
For those of you that didn't hear, I'm Robert Kenta. I was Cultural Resources Director at Select for right at 30 years, retired a year and a half ago. And the last 18 of those years, I served on elected government as well as working in cultural programs. It about wore me out. But during that time, probably 20 years ago-ish, Dave Hatch, you saw a photo of him. He had the 2 eagle feathers and was wearing the sea otter robe. I think he was at the Gwynn Library in South Beach at the Marine Science Center. And he happened across some kelp coverage maps from the 1920s, teens and 20s, I think. And there was, I think, particularly one guy that was on horseback traveling up and down the coast, noting these kelp forest habitats. And then he went and looked at kelp forest habitat existing at that time, 20 years ago, and saw that they had shrunk considerably. And so started raising the question in his mind, what is the difference? That's when he stumbled across the fact that sea otters are a keystone species, and some even say an ultra keystone species, because they don't just maintain a habitat or play a key part in that habitat, they create that habitat and then maintain it. And then, so he had friends, he had been an engineer for the city of Portland for a number of years and had great friends at all kinds of higher education institutions. Virginia Butler and Debbie Duffield at Portland State University started doing some scientific research on sea otter remains that had been recovered from coastal middens. And that effort was mostly centered around trying to figure out what the genetic relationship between the northern population and the southern population was. And the results pretty uniformly came out that this area of sea otter population was a natural mixing ground for northern and southern genetics, and we probably lost some of that genetic pool through that 90+% removal and separation of the two populations over time. They're treated as subspecies, but I think that's a mistake. I think originally there was continuity up and down throughout their range, and there would be genetic exchange back and forth. There wasn't the distinct remnant population genetics that we see today. So that original effort, it was also called the Alaka Alliance, and it was a more informal organization, not a separate 501c3 like today. And it was housed under EcoTrust roof, was the sponsoring organization. So that was some important initial work, and we've built on that, done lots of public education about the importance of sea otters to nearshore marine habitat, ecosystems, and economies. And I believe that, well, it's proven that that kelp forest habitat, that kelp is the base of food chain. The detritus falls to the bottom, things feed on that, bigger things feed on that, and it works its way up the chain. So in our traditions, sea otters have always represented abundance. Our people recognize that, our stories highlight that fact, that sea otters bring to us wealth and prosperity. So we're hoping for that to be the case again. Towards that, the Alaka Alliance of today, Oregon Wild, I think, was the sponsoring organization when we first got up and running. They were like our fiscal agent, managed any donations and grants we received. And then we got our separate 501c3 status. I've been working with not only the California sea otter researchers and working in those areas, but also so California and Alaska and Washington coast folks especially. So there's treatment, different treatment by U.S. Fish and Wildlife with the northern and southern population. Southern population is much smaller and it's considered a more threatened population. And there have been some successful reintroductions of that population farther up the coast out to the Channel Islands. I think they did. But every reintroduction has its challenges. And for the most part, I think they have to be supplemented. I believe the effort here in the early 70s was a one-time thing. They didn't bring any supplementary population to help them maintain and grow. So I think that's one of the things that will be different about this time. And you've probably already heard the tribe just received a grant $1.56 million from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. It's called the America the Beautiful Grant or Challenge Grant. Yeah, we're very excited about it. This was our second run with an application towards that effort. And we were almost hearing indications that we might miss out again this second attempt, and then lo and behold, we got an award. So very exciting stuff. Gives us a lot of ability to increase our working relationship with the Alaka Alliance and up and down the West Coast with different organizations, outreach to the fishing communities and the public. There's a huge amount of public education that needs to happen about the importance of this effort and the benefits that we will see. And there may be some drawbacks here and there, but overall, we'll see an increase in abundance if it's managed right. It was mentioned up north, there have been areas where sea otters were reintroduced and they have an overpopulation. We can help with that. Those will probably be at least our initial source populations. But I hope we don't lose sight of the fact that until we reconnect the southern and northern genetics, bull sea otter populations are at risk of genetic bottlenecking. So it's not healthy for them to be maintained as separate populations as they are now. And let's see.
There's stuff there.
Yes,
We had an ideal swimming pool for both of them, right?
yes.
At the aquarium. How much you bring the boy up and the gal down?
Can you talk to U.S. Fish and Wildlife for us?
It's not-
Uh,
You don't want those ladies because, you know, they take the men off their job, but
This is part of the discussion would be, like when there is a reintroduction effort, it would be in deep end and then hopefully have a soft reintroduction of or release of those otters. So they could be mating while they are in like, perhaps our new rehab facility. Like that's what it's being designed for, is to hold the otters. Make sure that they're healthy before their release and into the sea pens, and then do like a flow kind of release with that.
well, maybe they'll drop you a couple bucks to put in your pool.
I want to highlight too that Senator Merkley really championed our effort a few years ago, inserting some language in it. I think it was in the budget, really directing U.S. Fish and Wildlife to look into reintroduction efforts and what to do about the West Coast nearshore marine habitats and to expand sea otter range throughout its historic range. And maybe it didn't say exactly all of that, but it was a big green light to U.S. Fish and Wildlife to even talk about sea otters in places they weren't at that time. So the federal agency was very nervous, I think, about any involvement, any conversation, even with the Alaka Alliance, because they didn't feel like they had authorization to. Working under Endangered Species Act is very tricky business, and they felt like they had real sideboards on what they could say, especially publicly. But many of you probably know Roy Lowe, local U.S. Fish and Wildlife employee for a long time, a good friend of the Alaka Alliance. He sat on our board when we first reorganized, and he was freshly retired from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So he was very excited about that effort and joined us in it until he decided he wanted to be a little bit more fully retired. So I think that's pretty much what the other point I think about the grant is there'll be sharing of some of the funding annually. It's a 3-year grant of 1.56 million. I think it's about 100,000 a year will go to Alaka Alliance to assist them in their efforts. There will be a robust public outreach and also building of capacity within the tribes of the Oregon coast and Northern California, Yurok and Smith River Rancheria particularly. And we will then end up with a contractor who will be developing the reintroduction plan with lots of input from lots of places. It'll be a very well coordinated.
One last, go ahead.
The public decision-making process be in terms of the approval for reintroduction? Do you know that?
Oh, that'll be largely US Fish and Wildlife based. A lot of coordination with ODF&W and other agencies. I'm assuming NOAA and others have their input, but for sea otters, US Fish and Wildlife is the agency in charge.
Thank you, Robert.